So we can get started. So I am stoked to talk to you today because as I put in my note talking about our conversation, your book, Left of Bang, is without question my favorite self defense book, as we've talked about, because it trains the skill that is situation awareness. I have many books on mixed martial arts, jujitsu, weapon self defense, and all kinds of tactical and technical ways that we can defend ourselves individually. But you don't have anything if you can't detect a threat or anomaly ahead of time and maintain situation awareness to see a threat. And the story behind this book is as interesting as all the information that you put within it. And so I'd love to just start off you talking about the Combat Hunter program, when it was developed, and how it led to one of my favorite books that I've read, particularly on situational awareness.
Absolutely. And so the book Left to Bang, it tells the story of the Marine Corps' Combat Hunter program. And this was a program that was started in 2007. Then General James Mattis was looking at the situation that Marines and soldiers were facing in Iraq and Afghanistan and realized that we had become very reactive to everything that we were facing as our enemy, as the insurgents, the adversaries that we were looking for, took off their uniforms and blended back in with the civilian populace. They completely negated our military advantage that came with our technology and the different resources that we had. And as a result, Marines became very reactive. We would go on patrol, we would get attacked, we would, drive out of our bases and we would deal with the roadside bombs that, if you remember back to those early days, the Iraq Afghanistan war were the biggest threat that we faced. And he said, this is enough. This has to change. We can't just send Marines out of the wire and say, hey, go get attacked. But once you get attacked, there's no one better in the world than you at responding and reacting to this. And the Combat Hunter program was a course that was designed to just flip that script. It was designed to give Marines the ability to look at a crowd of people, understand the environment that we were operating in, and to have the ability to look out and say, not, 98% of the population that we're looking at today, they're fine. They're not looking to attack us, but these one or two individuals or this group, there's something different about them, and we need to take some action to begin to influence the way the fight was going and begin to regain that control that we had lost as that shift from the initial invasion into the insurgency really began. And that's what the book talks about. It really describes, one of the three portions of the Combat Hunter program to ultimately give Marines ability. Let's establish a baseline. Let's reach human behavior. And let's find those people that are out there targeting us.
So you were active duty for 7 years as an infantry officer in the Marine Corps,
Yep,
and you're one of the instructors in this program, correct?
that's right. Yeah.
And then what led you to wanting to write this book?
Mhm. When we were providing the training, for a Marine unit to be deemed pre-deployment qualified, they had to send about 40 out of every deploying 1,000 Marines to come through the Combat Hunter course. And we were hearing from Marines who had gotten the course, they had deployed, and were coming back with these stories and these examples of, hey, something I learned in this course, I'm alive today because of it. We recognized the ambush, we didn't go down that street, whatever the case. And they were coming back saying, I want to learn more. I want to go through this course a second time. There's a lot that I don't think I remember that I think I'd benefit from. And we had to look at these Marines and say, we appreciate that. We're so happy that this was a good use of your time and that you're here today, but we have to get to a different 40 Marines. And it was absolutely crushing, to tell a Marine that not only can they not go through the course, that there weren't really resources available for them to teach, where they could go off and study and learn this on their own. And my co-author, Jason Riley, and I just looked at this situation and said, this has to change. This is absolutely ridiculous. And that's when we decided to put those lessons together into the book to make sure that any Marine who wants, or soldier, or police officer, or anyone who wants to learn how to do this, that they have access to those resources. And that was really the goal of the book, is to make sure that anyone who wants to learn it, they could.
Some of my favorite books that I've read in any domain, and some of my favorite accounts on Substack, they look at the most extreme environments of the world. And of course, one of those environments is always going to be combat, whether it's modern
Hmm.
or ancient combat. And then they draw lessons from it so you can
Hmm.
translate it to everyday life. So you think of like Extreme Ownership and then the follow on Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink,
Hmm.
and many other books that use, like Sam Alimo on Substack. He takes extreme examples of ancient or modern combat and then translates them to modern dilemmas in life. And that's exactly what you did in Left of Bang through the genesis of the Combat Hunter program, but really the stories that training related to. And I remember reading it the first time. This is back when I was
Mhm.
doing my first duty station, probably around like 2014, 2015. And I was looking at it from the standpoint of how do I be a better audiologist so I can help people maintain their communication capability and situational awareness to impact the warfighter. But when I read it my second time, which was 3 or 4 years ago, and this is when I've done stress management, resilience training in the military now for 11 years. I was reading it from the standpoint of resilience and personal preparedness, and
Mhm.
the concepts and the reframes on a lot of terms that you use in that book. Again, you made it be based on a tactical environment for the military and really a strategic environment when you talk about personally detection
Yeah,
threat. But it translates so well to everyday life, and you've evolved it not only from a personal preparedness standpoint for self-defense, but really for organizational and many other domains, which is how you've evolved it now. Can you talk about
yeah.
the evolution of the book and how you're using those concepts?
Yeah, that has been the most, humbling, part of the experience. The book has been out for a little over a decade at this point, but, the first kind of shift in my head occurred when we were teaching, we were providing the Combat Hunter course to a reserve unit that was about to deploy, and this reserve unit, a lot of the students that were coming through the course were police officers day to day. And I remember, when one was pulling me aside after the course, said, "This was great. There's a lot of things that I'm undoubtedly going to use in Afghanistan, but I'm working, 4 or 5 days a week in this, gang controlled area of Los Angeles. I need this in my job. I don't just need this, to go overseas." And, that, started the shift of a lot of the concepts from a pure military focus into, well, how are you applying this domestically or in a law enforcement perspective, which very similar, but a number of differences in terms of authorities and goals and the mission of those organizations. And then as the book was written, it was really interesting to see how organizations had taken different pieces and then just adapted it to a business setting, thinking about strategy or how they're dealing with competitors or preparing for an uncertain future. Healthcare providers started using this, thinking about when they're providing patient care or how they're structuring kind of the patient experience. What are those pre-event indicators that let them know that something is going bad or that should draw their attention? Cybersecurity companies have embraced the concept of not just reacting to an intrusion or data breach or something like that, but how are they setting up their systems to be able to detect and uh, really just get that advanced notice, that advanced warning. And it's been, kind of crazy. When Jason and I first sat down to write the book, as I, kind of mentioned when we first talked about it, it was, if it helps one Marine, one soldier come back, from overseas, everything was worth it. And to see these different applications has truly just been very humbling. And I think, those parts that connect as you reread the book, to kind of your point, thinking about from that resilience lens, you know, there's arguably a greater and greater need, for organizations to think about, well, how can we get left to bang? How can we not be reactive? How, what can we do to make sure that we are not caught off guard, by events? And as people go through life and their careers, those situations, shift and they change based on whatever decisions they're making in the moment.
How do you conceptually define bang?
It's any event that you want advanced warning of, and that could be a threat event or an opportunity. Oftentimes, this is used in that threat recognition concept of we know we're about to get attacked, or we know that there's the threat of getting attacked. What are those prevent indicators that let us know someone is going through that attack cycle? And then once we can define that, you can start to define those prevent indicators, those behaviors that let you know this is happening, this is coming, it's time for us to intervene, or it's time to begin to influence those events. But it could also be, on the opportunity side as well, recognizing that there's times, stereotypical kind of business setting. There's a customer who is starting to go through the buying process. How can we influence that? But also shifts in the market, shifts in the environment, which create opportunities, for businesses to do something different or stand out or connect with their customers a little bit better. Well,
You have so many terms in the book, and I love your definition of bang just now
mhm,
because conceptual definition that doesn't have to be for a military environment where we're thinking about life or death threats. It can be any
mhm,
event that you want to be aware of. That could be an
mhm,
opportunity, it could be a threat, it could be you name it. But
mhm,
operating left of bang is looking for what you said, a great term from the book, pre-event indicators to clue you into ways to best prepare so you can respond as effectively you can or even get ahead of it so you don't even need to respond when it happens and you can just flow.
mhm,
When I read your book the second time, what really resonated with me was the conceptual terms of reactivity, responsiveness, and proactiveness. And
Mhm.
talking about personal preparedness and resilience, a lot of us can be prone to kind of just living passively, and then when something happens, we react to it. So that could be at home when the kids have a hard time. That could be at work when someone calls in sick and you have to pick up the slack. Or you name a countless examples of the event happens
Yeah.
and now we have no preparedness whatsoever. Responding, I like to differentiate from reacting, where prefrontal cortex is involved. We're thinking about the best ways to still bang has happened but effectively respond using rationality rather than emotional instincts. There's times to react when it's life or death, but just reacting versus responding, they're both right of
Yeah.
bend actions where proactivity is ideal, where you're training yourself so you can respond as effectively as you can to those uncertain things. But talk a little about reactivity,
Yeah.
response, and proactivity.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about getting left to bang, you have to acknowledge that there's going to be effort involved in this. It takes mental energy, mental effort to, look at a crowd or a market or whatever it is that you're thinking about and elevate your situational awareness, define what you're looking for, and then put in the work to go see it. There's certain things in life where it's simply not worth the effort. You're not looking to get left to bang to, a paper cut or something like that. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna put a band-aid on it and you're gonna move on with your day. But it's the things that are truly either catastrophic for you, if there's, I don't accept, the term of acceptable loss, if we're talking about a loss of life or a fatality, we should put in the work to make sure that we are minimizing those chances on the business side. If it's, looking for certain types of deals or opportunities that are going to change the trajectory of your company, that's probably worth the effort to put into it. And when we think about getting left to bang, it's not just preventing, that event. What we're really talking about is influencing the outcome of it. And you can't do that without early recognition. And once you have that early recognition, you can either start to shape events or influence them, or simply be better positioned where once it happens, we're going to be able to be the first ones to move because we saw it coming, we thought about it, and we know what we're going to do and how we're going to respond the minute bang occurs.
We evolve to be threat
Hmm.
detectors. So we have these amazing senses that work together. The brain interprets them through the amygdala, and we determine what's a threat,
Hmm.
what's not, including our thoughts. Sometimes our thoughts can influence the stress
Yeah.
system to take action. But of all the terms in your book that really resonated with me, that changed the way I think about situational awareness, it was reframing the word threat to anomaly. We still want to think about threats, of course, but when you talk about
Hmm.
conceptualizing left of bang across domains when it's not a physical threatening environment like life or death military operations, changing threat to anomaly was powerful for me. Can you talk a little about
Hmm.
why you used anomaly and how you use that across domains outside of a military environment?
Yeah. And if we think about this, there's really five core pieces for any organization or any individual that's looking to get left to bang. There's these five steps that have to be navigated. The first is recognizing that events begin before they start impacting you or your organization. The hurricane forms before it makes landfall. The shooter starts to procure, an attacker starts to procure weapons or develop their plan or move to a target before, the shooting begins. Attackers or cyber hackers, excuse me, they have to start to, probe a network before they can find their way in. That attack started long before those incidents and impacts occur. Once you acknowledge that, you can begin to define what are those things that are going to attract our attention. And as you define those indicators, as you define those behaviors, as you define kind of those factors, when you are left to bang, you're going to realize there's a lot of false positives in this process. You still need the ability, once you identify that prevent indicator, to confirm it, to validate it, to assess and say, yes, this is a threat or an opportunity that I care about. And I think that word anomaly ties into this, where you're going to see some behaviors, tying this back into threat recognition, the concepts of the book. There's some behaviors that you're going to see that could mean a person is going through that attack cycle, or those same behaviors could show you that they're just having a bad day and that they're uncomfortable or they're angry or whatever it is that you're observing for a completely legitimate reason. And once you make that recognition, though, then you can start to assess it and you can have a conversation. You can continue to observe. You can, think about what you're going to do to confirm, is this person angry because they're about to launch an attack, or they're angry because they just, had a fight with their spouse, so they're just frustrated at, something at work. And through that conversation, you can now assess it and figure out, yes, we care about it, or nope, false positive. And so, to your point, that word anomaly, this precedes that threat assessment portion where you're going to have, and you're going to confirm whether through observation or some sort of other action, yeah, this is something that I care about. And so, that word anomaly helps just shift this back to start to identify, the pool of people that we need to assess, or those pool of situations and incidents that we need to start to think through as well.
Like you talked about and talk about
Hmm.
at length in the book, with the Combat Hunter program, the environment changed. Our
Hmm.
adversaries adapted. They took off uniforms. They no longer carried firearms. IEDs, of course, were implanted underground or in invisible spots. So the enemy was invisible in ways that we were not used to, let alone an environment that our troops are still adapting to in general. So threats were not obvious. But if you could
Hmm.
train them on detecting, first, you have to understand the baseline. So you talk a lot about
Yep.
understanding baselines, which this applies across domains too. So if you
Yep.
understand what is expected in the general baseline, like how cars are parked, how people operate, or just human behavior, and then you
Yeah.
look for changes and or deviations from that baseline, now we can start picking up on things without an obvious threat. And I loved that because again, it requires some training. It requires
Mhm.
understanding of whatever your pre-event indicators might be based on a baseline. But
Mhm.
now it doesn't matter what the domain is. It doesn't matter what the environment is. It requires understanding of that baseline so you can detect anomalies, whether it's a threat or not. Your situational awareness can clue you into where you need to focus, and that
Mhm.
it's powerful because again, it doesn't matter where we're talking. This can be
Mhm.
applied anywhere.
To have that level of situational awareness, you need to have, you need to know two things. You need to know what you're looking for, and you need to know how to look for it, how to search your surroundings. And, that anomaly, recognizing that anomaly might be the goal, but the way you get there is you first define what's normal, that baseline, then that anomaly, that thing that is not normal, that thing that stands out from the baseline, that attracts your attention. And so that baseline portion, this is what allows, again, for the context of recognizing threats, so this, transcends to a number of different fields. This is what makes it a universal approach. If you can define what's normal, it doesn't matter if what's normal here in the US is different than what's normal in the Middle East or Asia or Europe or Africa or wherever you are. You define what's normal in that environment, and then that anomaly will naturally reveal itself. And it's what helps make sure that you can apply the same approach, the same principles, the same concepts, no matter where you are, instead of getting hyper focused on, oh, this is United States specific threat recognition, and this is Africa specific threat recognition. Chances are that's going to be a very limited program in terms of what the value that would provide. Of once you learn this baseline plus anomaly equals decision structure, though, you can take that with you into the different contexts of the environments that you work in.
And it's probably why the book has remained on the Commandant's reading list since I think 2017 is when it was on. So 8 years. Multiple people in that position, highest ranking officer in the Marine Corps, Commandant, and recommended reading list since then.
Mhm.
But the book has been out since 2014. It's just so cool to make such valuable information available to all. But your point exactly, it doesn't matter the environment that we're operating in, the concepts apply. And the book reads like a training program. You use examples in an operational environment, but very intelligently and I'm sure intentionally choosing concepts. Did you think when you were writing this book, like this has implications to impact environments outside of military?
No, the simple answer.
Yeah.
Um, you look at a lot of military programs, you can think about this, from more of a, theoretical level. There's a civil military divide, and arguably for a reason. When we were writing the book, we were either still in the military or had just gotten out, where its application to different functions of both business environments, but society, domestically, internationally, I absolutely did not have the perspective to realize that those things would transcend or understand how, writing something for the military could apply to these different fields and different purposes. It was, like I said, I was very right of bang, if you will, to that
Yeah.
impact. It was written for a very specific group.
And it's fascinating that, I mean, your intention, beautiful. You just
Mhm.
wanted it accessible to more people to save lives in the military, maybe
Mhm.
similar entities like first responders, law enforcement. But your intention of helping people in those domains, and now it's expanded well beyond that. And I reposted a previous article of yours on the evolution of Left of Bang. And it, of course, we're already implying that has evolved quite a bit since then into to new domains. What kind of domains are you finding yourself teaching this
Yeah.
concept, holding on it these days?
A lot of where we're applying this today relates to disasters. And, one of the things that really stood out, to me is, leaving the military, seeing different applications for it was, the scale of some of the incidents that, affect Americans today. And when you think about some of these disasters that we've experienced, um, you know, uh, just give me some examples that come to mind. The flooding that occurred down in Texas over the July 4th, holiday. I believe it was about 130 people passed away. More people passed away in that flooding event than did during Hurricane Harvey. 2023, the fires in Maui, about 100 people passed away. And that Hurricane Helene last fall, 250 people passed away. We just passed the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. About 1,400 people passed away, almost 3,000 from September 11th. Locally, disasters like this occur very infrequently, but nationally and globally, they're very, they occur much more, they're much more common. And those types of situations that can benefit from this left to bang approach and thinking about how are we detecting these potential threats? How are we thinking about the recognition, the confirmation that our community, our organization will be at risk? How are we making decisions about what we're going to do? And then how are we proactively taking action to be pre-positioned, to be in a spot where we can immediately influence events either right before or right after that events occur? It's simply, you know, it's an unacceptable level of loss of life in our country for these types of events. And that is where I'll be applying it to help different public safety and emergency management, and both in the public and private sector, think about their readiness and their preparation and their ability to first detect it and then strategically and thoughtfully do something about it before it actually occurs.
And you've been in this arena now for a little over a decade, correct? With
Mhm.
different working, consulting different companies, but
Yep.
very similar overlap with disaster preparedness. In your opinion, working with, I know you've worked education, organizations,
Mhm.
government, state and federal, at all kinds of different levels. We know disasters are possible. We know seasons, they're more likely, but like you said, very locally, they may be infrequent, even if we have the knowledge that it's possible. Are people and organizations somewhat prepared ahead of time, or like from my perception, disaster preparedness is not that sexy. It's not something
Mhm.
people talk about too often or do until they're forced to do it. And why do you think that is?
What is changing, I think, is the perception of these risks. And when Left to Bang, when the Combat Hunter course was created, when the book was written, there wasn't a lot available that looked at violence prevention. There were different pieces that were out there, but there wasn't a lot of spots or resource that you could turn to say, this is how I'm going to learn how to do this. One of the things that the book provided was this case study of the Marine Corps saying, not only is this possible, the Marines are doing this, and the Marines have found success doing this. And to a certain degree, it was like the 4 minute mile where organizations started realizing, oh, now that it's possible, let's start to think about how do we implement this? How do we integrate this into our organization? That is occurring, arguably today, right now, in fields like cybersecurity and disaster preparedness and some corporate security concepts where not only is the risk increased to the point where people are saying we cannot let this continue to happen. They're seeing the application of, thoughtfully, if we are prepared in these ways or to be able to do these things, we can begin to protect our communities or our staff or our organizations. And so your question on are people ready or not, organizationally, I'm a little bit skewed in this where the organizations that we are working with and spending our time, they've already made this decision of we are going to be prepared. So I think that yes, there's a lot of organizations that certainly either are or are moving down this path. But I will acknowledge that for a large number of them, something has occurred where their executive or their leader, their senior leadership team has said, this cannot happen again. We cannot accept this anymore. And so very often there's a right of bank component where an organization is experienced it and they are now committing to not letting it happen again. And so it's a bit of a shift, but it's certainly occurring, I think, right now as expectations rise and also the ability and the potential, for them to be prepared.
Yeah, that never again mindset. But ideally, of
Mhm,
course, you're proactive, especially when you enter phases of life or domain
mhm,
where the risk is prevalent. For me, it, entering the military, Camp Lejeune, started just getting interested in my job and how it impacts military. But then it was
mhm,
moving to Guam, my second duty station, knowing the risk of typhoons and tsunamis out there, rolling power outages, limited resources. And this is, of course, pre COVID, left during COVID, and then you can see anything's
mhm.
possible anytime. So when things happen and you realize how fickle not only logistics and processes are, but things that we take for granted. Sometimes you see mindset shift, but man,
Mhm,
it's how ideal it can be when we can be proactive, whether it's just skills in general, so you can self sustain during lack of power, terrible storms, you name it, but
mhm,
also organizationally when we can have ways to not only survive but thrive. And I
mhm.
see you talk about that quite a bit too, the concept of anti-fragility, where some
Yeah,
organizations or people, when bang happens, not only do they resist and maintain function, but they enhance function or they grow because of it. And I love that concept too. Can you talk a little bit about that? People growing or organizations growing post bang.
yeah, and, what you're first describing, though, when people decide to invest in a left-to-bang or preparedness or proactive approach, they recognize that a risk is present, right? Everything starts with that perception of a risk. You know, no one goes to a gym if they don't feel like health is going to ever be a factor, for them. You don't invest in learning unless you think those things or you think that you're going to be have fewer opportunities as a result of not learning. You invest oftentimes because there is a perceived risk and it's something that you're willing to do. But once you do that, once you make that recognition, to your point, there's kind of these three organization types of organizations that we see when disruptions and disasters occur. There's some that fail right away; they collapse, they were not ready, they are overwhelmed by events, and they cannot function. There's some that, as you mentioned, they just kind of hang on. They survive. They make it through, but barely, and they've probably burned some bridges and burned out their staff and everything else. But there's this third group, that very anti-fragile, type of community that grows when disasters and disruptions and crises occur. And growth can come in many ways. There's maybe the business side that you think about of, increasing their opportunity financially, for their business. They could sell to more customers or reach more customers, and there's that business growth, but also for government agencies or more mission driven organizations. When you are ready for an event and you are pre-positioned and you're ready to respond confidently and decisively, you can improve relationships, with your community. You can prove your credibility to your senior leadership team, maybe secure a larger budget or more staff, or the things that you could not do previously. When people realize this organization is needed, this function is needed, and they're really good, we just have to surge some resources into it. And when that occurs, even non-financially driven organizations can experience that growth and come out of incidents stronger and better positioned than they were
And it's
before
just
that occurred.
And it's just so interesting. Another term that you write about, anticipatory thinking, and
Mhm.
just again, that's tied into proactivity. But just having the mindset of we don't know what bang is when it's going to happen. That just embracing
Yeah.
uncertainty, but having plans and contingencies for those plans in place to again recognize anomalies and all of that. But things happen like COVID and the world shuts down, and those that can adapt, those that can pivot, but those that have the mindset ahead of time to most effectively respond individually and collectively. It's very interesting to see the novel and creative ways that anti fragility happens post
Mhm.
resilience for whatever that bang might be. And Adapti adaptability, there's many different types
Mhm.
of intelligence, emotional, standard IQ, but then there's that AQ now that, is relatively newer, but just the ability to flex and adapt and the willingness to do so. How do
Mhm.
you, teaching that concept or do you talk about that much?
Yeah, this is something that I've really learned as starting to work with business executives and founders and owners of companies who are looking at this left to bang approach. There's a cliche that sometimes the sentiment will come through where line level staff, they're focused on solving the problems of yesterday. And then your operational managers, they are solving the problems of today. And one of these frustrations of executives is they feel like they're the only ones in their organization looking far enough forward to identify those threats, identify those opportunities, and start to position the organization. And that challenge is very similar to the way that Marines were taught situational awareness and police officers were taught situational historically of, hey, just go do this job for 20 years. I was told that before my first deployment, you deploy 3 times, 3, 4 times, and you're gonna become really good. at recognizing threats, and you realize how ridiculous of a sentiment that is. But it's often the very similar approach in business of you do it long enough, you start to assume those senior leadership roles, you'll begin to think about the future. If you're simply doing it by through immersion or doing more time on the job or getting more experience, it's going to take you a lot longer to get there. One of the takeaways from the book and how that concept applies today is we can break those things down of what do you want your teams looking for? How do you want your teams looking at the market, looking at the environment so that they're not just focused on today or yesterday, but they are truly assessing, kind of the business. And that concept of teaching what to look for and how to look for it, you begin to create these conditions where that organization can now grow because it's not random, it's not haphazard, it's not, hey, do this for a few more years to become good at it. We're structuring that learning not to make it restrictive, but to accelerate, really through that learning process as well. And you asked a question in there, Kyle, and I apologize, I completely forgot what you actually asked.
I'm listening
Yeah.
to your answer
Yeah.
to I'm forgetting it too because you
Okay.
said so many great things
Yeah.
there that I wanted to hit on. You're talking about learning through immersion, and like
Mhm.
the effect of experience is undeniable. Like experience is
Yeah.
fantastic, but we can learn from each other's mistakes. We can learn from history, and we can prime perspectives before you enter a given arena, so
Mhm.
you can be effective and efficient in your orientation. So you can make the
Mhm.
most of that experience rather than just
Yeah.
learn by fire over time. And it's so
Yeah.
funny because you hear all the time, like 10 years and then you'll be an expert. Like, okay, there's some people in martial arts, you can become an expert in 3 years. Sometimes they're a black belt in jiu-jitsu. It's very unheard of. But some of the
Mhm.
best competitors of all time, BJ Penn will be one of them. He lived it, but he also had the best mentors in the world, having him focus on what mattered, so he could win one of the biggest competitions of all time in 3 years, which is wild but awesome. But priming people ahead of the environment, and then considering
That's
the
where we're going
tactical
with this.
tactical,
Yeah.
operational, strategic, which you talk about quite a bit in the book too, because you do need to be
Mhm.
able to look at not only the day to day, but the strategic and long term applications of yourself and the organization. And we'll start
Mhm.
getting into individual resilience in a little bit, but it's still so interesting, these domains, long term
Yeah.
versus midterm and short term thinking, and teaching
And this
people
is
what
where
is
I was
most
going.
appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The challenge, with that, when you start to think longer term, it's an unscoped problem. If you talk about, hey, what sort of scenarios, what are you thinking about for the future? That question alone can paralyze people if I don't really know how to frame or define this future events. And by thinking about and taking a step back where you're looking for certain things, you're just framing the problem a little bit more clearly. And once that problem is scoped, once that scenario is defined of, well, how are we going to prepare if this is the future? What do we need to do to succeed in that? Once that is, primed and scoped and clear, there's a lot of really smart people, really capable people who can say, okay, if that's what we're talking about, this is what I think we need to do. But when it's just so uncertain or so broad or so vague and ambiguous, that oftentimes shuts down the process before it ever begins. And so this whole that diatribe monologue, whatever before, was leading up to that. Of by defining it, you create these conditions for people to really look forward at those situations, build the capabilities they need, and then ultimately, get left to bang to whatever it is that you're concerned about looking ahead.
My favorite sources of knowledge these days are less technique and tactical knowledge, where,
Hmm.
for example, if we're trying to prepare for an active shooter, if I'm a school, someone comes in and they talk about this is what you do for an active shooter. Like, that can be a great training, of course. If that is your intention, that's what you want to learn about. But if you're trying to learn how to think, rather than
Hmm.
learning techniques, learning concepts so you can apply that type of thinking, in this case, left of bang thinking with anticipatory thinking, reactivity versus proactivity, anomalies, knowing your baseline. You teach in the situational awareness training that is left of bang people how to
Hmm.
think when it comes to preparedness of any kind. And you told a really funny story on our friend Mark McGrath's podcast about one of the first trainings that you gave when you started educating in town, and it was to a school. And I think you were talking primarily to teachers, correct?
Yeah,
And
of
so
a relatively safe. So the story was for anyone that hadn't heard it. My first ever paying client, was the school district in Long Island, New York. And up until this point, I had only trained infantry Marines who were getting ready to deploy. It's a certain mindset, it's a certain audience, and to keep their attention, there's certain things that you will do as an instructor. One of those steps was I would show this video of a suicide bomber, um, and to prove that they had something to learn. pause it right before the attack occurred. Who's the threat? And when I played this video in front of a group of elementary school teachers, uh, I lost the room, and the principal canceled the rest of the training. He just had all the students leave, and then he spent some time teaching me about, well, how do I connect with this audience? How is this different than an infantry marine? This is a kindergarten teacher who's dealing with, generally speaking, very sweet kids 99 times out of 100. And so, yeah, that
Yeah.
was the embarrassing story from
Hey,
six
sometimes
more.
sometimes experience does provide
Mm.
great lessons. However, I mean, that was
Mhm.
a great learning experience for you to think about scaling of the concepts
Yeah.
to an educational domain because and then also when we think about tactical versus strategic, that kind of training probably is appropriate for a principal when you think about security measures of the school. And then you can
Mhm.
scale it down, maybe train the trainer like a principal to the teachers. But what I love about Left of Bang is Bang could be one kid having a really hard day that's going to disrupt the classroom or
Yep.
that needs connection or you name it. But understanding your environment and safety measures when it comes to controlling the room, but also just behavior and personality variance amongst the children that you're teaching. The concept applies. And from that lesson that you learned with those teachers that day, the evolution of Left of Bang, have you tailored your trainings to different populations? Maybe we'll just stay on the school. Like, how have you shifted maybe a training like that to kindergarten teachers now, or what would you focus on
Mhm.
there for the same concept?
Yeah. So when we're talking to that audience, because these behaviors, very much to your point, apply to both threats, but also people who are just having a bad day necessarily. We will spend almost the entire time teaching, talking about it and what matters to them, talking to teachers. This is how to, read the room to figure out, is your lesson connecting? Are there certain students who are struggling? Are there certain students who are bored because they've already grasped it? And by spending it talking about the thing that they care about, they're very engaged, they have questions, and then only at the very end of the training will we tie it back into the same approach that makes you a better teacher. Reading the room, understanding your audience also can make you more likely to recognize those threats and recognize the person who's not just, feeling unprepared for their quiz or their test or whatever else is stressing them out, but they're uncomfortable because they're about to do something very violent in this building as well. So that's the conclusion as opposed to the core thread throughout the whole course.
Yeah, and then pre-event indicators can become just subtle changes in behavior. Like this
Mhm.
student is typically really outgoing, really loud, and they're really quiet today and reserved. And again, that could be a threat, or it could just be they need connection. And this is where you
Mhm.
can now start scaling this concept to any domain, including personal resilience. And I love thinking
Mhm.
about what is my typical baseline? How am I doing today? Because you cannot intervene effectively on any problem unless you're aware of it. So,
Mhm.
situational awareness or self awareness is the most important skill that you can possess before anything else because you cannot solve problems that you're unaware of.
Mhm.
Have you talked at all about Left of Bang when it comes to personal resilience, emotional intelligence, or have you collaborated with anyone in that capacity?
Not directly or nothing that comes immediately to mind, but as you describe this, I think about the 9/11 report, right? And this was titled "A Failure of Imagination." Right? It wasn't that we were unable to prevent it or unable to collect intelligence or information about this threat. It was an inability to tie these things together. And, what strikes me is, Kyle, we met through Substack initially, and the value that that platform has to helping professionals in whatever field you care about get beyond that, where you're looking at creators and writers who are going in depth and who can, mentally, as I've gotten more immersed into the platform, finding those authors who continually push your understanding of a topic or continually force you to think about this situation a little bit differently. And once you can find those, it just starts to break you out of that mold of being limited to your application or limited to your profession, that thing that you are thinking about day in and day out, just to make you ask that question of, well, would it work here? How would we tweak it, or how would we modify it, or what's different about this environment? And I think that's just such a critical point of whether we're talking about resilience or threat recognition or business or anything. It's just making sure that you are continually expanding your perspective to consider more, possible future scenarios and to define that the thing that, tying it back to the teacher story, tying it back to the thing that matters to you in your career, in your interest in your life.
Yeah, and that's what happened the second read of your book a few years ago from me because
Mhm,
I unintentionally it just started to resonate with me in that way. I read it again from a disaster preparedness standpoint, just from like,
mhm,
hey, I remember this book, situation awareness. I was doing a few things, work
mhm,
for some potential projects on it, but everything I read like just resonated. Resilience, emotional intelligence, bang being losing rationality of the ability to reason, whether that's
mhm,
panic, freezing, or some sort of outburst. I mean, I'll tell you this morning, I was trying to stay left of bang all morning, and I was pretty successful in that just from a parenting perspective. But
mhm,
most of my kids this morning had a hard time, and we got back from a long weekend trying to get some things done. Still on military holiday today for Labor Day before I go back tomorrow. So the wife and I are trying to be productive, but tough morning. But me recognizing, well, actually, my wife recognized like they're having a hard time. We're getting settled back in. We're having a hard time because we want to get things done. So known environment where stress might be a little bit higher. Now, me
mhm,
recognizing my baseline where I'm feeling symptoms of stress and pre-event indicators of different thoughts in my head. Like a big one for me, if I'm cussing in my head, then I know, like unless it's for jokes or humor, I know
yeah,
that's a pre-event indicator. I know that is a potential step toward bang or me saying or doing something that I'm not proud of that I'll have to repair with my kids. I never go too far, but even just me yelling at them, I'm never proud of that. Unless I want to raise my voice for a safety, physical safety thing. I don't
mhm,
like raising my voice if I don't need to, but yeah,
mhm,
I'm not gonna say or I've never done or said anything that I truly regret as far as like irreversible damage. But bang for me is just losing my cool and an emotional outburst that I'm not proud of that I then need to repair and apologize for. It happens and I'll do it, of course. That's still a lesson, but it's so funny that I read your book the second time and parenting,
mhm.
managing myself personally at out in life or on the mats for jujitsu and mixed martial arts or just at work, difficult conversations with others. Like bang is my ability to maintain ration before or right of bang is I've now lost control and I need to take steps back.
When you hit that stressful situation, when bang occurs, especially if you're caught off guard, right? Your body releases that chemical cocktail into your system, the adrenaline, the dopamine, the cortisol, all those things that help your body fight or flight your way out of the situation. When you're getting caught off guard, that your body's unprepared, for that dump, and when it happens, it affects you physically, and it can limit your ability to continue perceiving the situation, or it can limit your self-awareness to realize how your stress is now contributing to, whatever it is you're facing, with your children. One of the benefits of being left to bang, it's by providing that advanced warning, you're able to, maybe not and with the incident without bang actually occurring, you're able to start addressing it ahead of time, which maybe reduces that, the impact of that adrenaline, that cortisol on your system. As a result, maybe you're a little bit more rational. You can realize that, no, I don't need to raise my voice. I just need to move them along so they can get in the car or whatever it is that, uh, you're facing and, kind of thinking about it. But you cannot get there without awareness of others. And that same awareness of others, for someone who is reflective, can turn this back on themselves and, help, realize when they're getting amped up. We use this sometimes in, talking to, people who are looking at de-escalation or negotiation. Your behavior is influencing the outcome. If you're displaying very dominant behavior, that's having an effect on others. If you're displaying very submissive behavior, that is having an effect on others. When you can use that intentionally, kind of your point, you want to raise your voice when it's a physical safety thing, you want to keep your kids out of harm's way. That is very different than, I don't know, just dealing with the frustration of, not moving fast enough or something like that.
Right.
And, kind of recognizing that just all comes back to that, same point you opened up with was when you can start with that awareness, the options and the opportunities that you have to intervene or adjust your own behavior or adjust to influence the, situation just starts to go up. That is simply not present when the first time something happens is the first time you're aware of it.
Yeah, I love that you relate it to de-escalation because I even if I'm trying to de-escalate a little altercation between my kids or you name it, me screaming and losing control, just like for that first responder, if someone's irate or is going to benefit from de-escalation, you losing control yourself or trying to scream louder, that's not going to help with de-escalation. So, like, and that line between calm and panic or just emotional reasoning, and I love that you also said earlier that stress response that helps us because
Mhm,
absolutely our stress response evolved and is hardwired to help us do supernatural things if and when we need to. And all of these emotions and feelings that influence it's activation. Yeah, the
Mhm,
release of those neurotransmitters like adrenaline, we can do some remarkable things acutely if and when life or death is needed, life or death situations and an out a response is needed. But when we ruminate
mhm,
and keep that going and we don't have awareness of it and management of it, of course, just prolonged cortisol and its effects can be detrimental for us. So sometimes we need to use our instincts, and if it's life or death,
mhm,
absolutely. Stress response, do your thing, it helps us. But more often than not, even in dangerous situations where there are threats like de-escalation of an individual, management of that system from awareness, the pre-event indicators, the known environment, and then
mhm.
staying calm. Crucial skill that's going to help you thrive no matter where you are.
No disagreement. Or no, nothing to add on to that. You got it.
Yeah. And,
Yep.
and so, talking about your writing and the evolution of Left of Bang, I didn't know this until
Mhm,
recently. Is your Substack account, like a lot of amazing Substack accounts, have different tiers, and your paid tier, I learned, has a enormous training module for the Left of Bang concept, and so
mhm.
like I think of like return on investment because I'm a pretty cheap asshole when it comes to a lot of things, but I've paid for some pretty cool training and it's pretty amazing that you're offering the training that you do through your paid platform at the price that
Mhm.
you're offering it because I know what organizations pay for stuff like that. I know what people pay, and I know what I've paid for other trainings, which is way more than what you have in your annual paid tier. But I'd love just to hear, as I've only just started doing it, what you
Yeah.
offer through the trainings that you have online.
So there's, as I kind of mentioned, there's these different steps that are required to get left to bang. And, one of those is the threat recognition portion. And so we have our online course, which takes, if you don't want to read left to bang, you can see more of a video based delivery of the same concepts that have evolved over time, as well as about 50 or 60 different practice exercises where you can go learn about, certain behavior that we talk about in the course of the book and just practice it to gain those repetitions to improve your recognition prime decision making, just to improve the speed at which you can make these behavior observations. And that's one portion. We also have some other, playbooks and other resources that are being developed along the way where it's not enough to recognize a threat. Um, you have to be able to act on it. You have to be able to influence it. And one of the challenges that a lot of organizations, a lot of our clients face is building those plans and building those capabilities. And so there's just resources in that paid section for how do you complete those projects. You need to actually take a concept and an idea and a risk to, okay, this is how we're going to deal with it and be able to deal with it at the speed that you require in your organization as well. And when we think about, the original goals of the book, those have transcended into the goals that my business partner Jonathan and I have for our company. It's to make the resources for anyone or any organization that wants to get left to bang. Our company exists to make sure that they are available to them, and that is an ongoing, probably never-ending pursuit. But we wanted to make sure that they're accessible, yet still able to um, grow as a company so that we can continue to make both our past products, but also future courses and future resources available as well. And so kind of the price that you mentioned, we believe those are accessible to a lot of people. At the same time, because we're providing hopefully value, we're able to, continue to serve the same, customers in different products in different ways going forward as well. And Substack has made that available to us in ways that were simply not available or not easily available through just different websites or different platforms and that we've used in the past.
Yeah, and you recently became a bestseller on Substack, so congrats for that, well deserved.
Thank you.
Clearly,
Thank you.
a lot of people would agree that that's an awesome price and a return on investment that's worthwhile. And I'm a big reader, so like I prefer at least getting my initial knowledge through reading. And
Mhm.
I've read this. I don't reread many books, but that was one that I'll reread again at some point just to see what lens I have it the next time. And again, I love the extreme environment comparisons, but it's cool that you've evolved the material to now have video and other
Mhm.
examples that may be more relevant for organizations and people as the book has been published. But another thing that I saw is
Yeah.
you have a companion book for the book itself, probably with what I imagine are exercises and different ways to start thinking about how to relate it to the domains that you're operating in.
I think what a PDF of the book?
I
Is that
saw
a
online that there was like a companion exercise book.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, so there's some pieces that are, for organizations that are sometimes they'll use the book for professional reading or, kind of within organizations, there's kind of a discussion guide
Yes, that's
that
what
can support
that's the book.
that.
Yes, that's what I
Yeah.
meant.
as well, just to kind of focus on pulling out not only the theme, if someone's facilitating that conversation, but also why that's there, or different examples of how that applies to different organizations, just to help with that translation. But one of the reasons we put the course online was two. One, the demand for the course, the demand for the training exceeded anyone's ability to provide that much in-person training. And so by doing it, online, people can learn on their own at the pace they want to do with zero middleman or hassle between, decision to learn and access to the material. But the other thing is the course and its applications could, as we've been talking about, continue to evolve. And a lot of the videos that we have with the practice and the extra exercises that are available, those have come from students saying, here's a video I saw on YouTube, or here's an example that we saw in our organization. And we'll break that down and then make that video available to all of our past students through the platform. And so, you haven't gone through the course years ago or haven't gone through the course today, you continually get those updates and improvements that are right there as well.
Love it. Yeah, knowledge is plentiful all over the world these days, online and in general. And then
Mm.
credible knowledge is not as plentiful unless you do your research. And you have some very credible sources that backed this book when it was created. And of course, General Mattis, who was one of the creators of the Combat Hunter program. And then you had what was and still is one of my favorite books on self defense. I mentioned self defense, and I have many
Yep.
books on but situation awareness is needed before whatever your weapon system or collective response to that self-defense might be. You need situation awareness. My favorite book before that was Gavin
Yeah.
DeBecker's Gift of Fear. And then you also had Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, retired Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, who wrote On Killing. I haven't read that yet, but I read On Combat, which is incredible. It
Hmm.
talks about evolution of training. You had like this,
Yeah.
and then not only that, Stephen Pressfield did the forward in your book, and it was his publishing company that made it. So you talk about
Yep.
like amazing team of individuals who have credibility when it comes to impactful knowledge backing this book. What was that like? And I'll expand upon some of the knowledge that I've gained and how I use it in my life now.
Yeah. Well, having the support from even just those four individuals you named was remarkable at the start. But Left of Bang and Gift of Fear should not be thought of as competitive, or either or resources. Where a lot of organizations find it's them together provide what they're looking for. The Gavin DeBecker approach and what's talked about in Gift of Fear is trusting your instincts and trusting your intuition that when you see something that's bad, don't doubt yourself. One of the things that Left of Bang offers is just a chance to step back, articulate what you're seeing, articulate what you're observing, be confident that because all those behaviors are backed by peer-reviewed science, that what you're seeing is an accurate reflection of someone's intentions, that you can trust that. And when that is paired with Left of Bang or paired with Gift of Fear, provides both sides of this spectrum. Working with law enforcement professionals as an example, they have to be able to articulate their reasonable, articulable suspicion of why they thought, situation was going to go bad. But oftentimes it starts with that intuition that, Gavin talks about in his book. And then we can just help complement that with some of the language and terminology as well.
Yeah. My bad, Gavin, as you listen to this. I wasn't trying to say either or in any way. I love that book. I bought that book
Yeah.
for so many people in my life when I first read it, which was before your book. But you're so
Mhm.
right. Instincts versus anticipatory thinking. So it's almost like how can we effectively use our emotions and our subconscious selves and pair that with a trained and prepared conscious and rational self through
Mhm.
some of these concepts of left of bang so they can work together whenever bang and uncertain events, which we can never fully prepare for, occur. And I couldn't agree more that very different concepts, but both can be leveraged for an effective
Yeah.
response for uncertainty.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with any work by researcher Dr. Gary Klein, who's done a lot of work on recognition primed decision making, which ties very closely into intuition. And what he's talking about is that your ability to quickly size up and understand and make sense of what you're seeing and compare it oftentimes intuitively and at a subconscious level to all your previous experience and those patterns of behavior that you've seen throughout your life. This is what accelerates decision making. And so by learning the behaviors and learning the structure that we're talking about, you're creating historical life experience that allows you to do this when you're under stress, when you're under pressure, when it's truly a life or death decision. You can use the process that we talk about in Left to Bang and these video examples on the site to be able to make these decisions, oftentimes before you even realize that your brain is going through this process of recognizing danger, realizing there's something that wants your attention.
Absolutely. And I'm not, I feel like I'm familiar with the name, but the actual material, I'm gonna have to look into that. So I appreciate,
Mhm.
um,
Absolutely incredible concepts.
yeah,
Sources of Power is one of his books. Streetlights and Shadows. Absolutely recommend
yeah.
everything from
And
Dr. Gary Klein.
what Gavin de Becker talks about so well, like our gut instinct and our ability to subconsciously allow our senses to clue us into threats that could be physically dangerous. I couldn't agree more. But since that book was released, our environment, our world has changed quite a bit. And I love to
Mhm,
write on and think about and talk about the concepts of physical safety versus psychological safety, because sometimes
mhm,
um, our gut instinct can lead us astray in a non-life or death situation when it comes to where we orient our focus. So, like if it's online, social media, what's happening all around the world, there are terrible things happening every minute that can have
mhm.
us in stress and reactivity mode. So again, pairing it, like you said, with a book like yours, so we can focus on what is the event that truly is our priority. So we can allow our instincts to be trained to optimize responsiveness for those situations there, differentiating psychological and physical safety. Big thing for me. And have that something that you talk about much in any of your trainings, and how you just elaborating on how you pair well with Gavin de Becker's work.
I think that immediately comes to mind, to be
Yeah,
honest with you. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And it's one that I'm going to continue to think about in
yeah.
relation to yeah, just yeah, it's an interesting thought for like instincts and how important they are. And we train instincts, of course, in the military. You don't want to be
Yeah.
a philosophical person when you're in a combat zone. You want to be leaning on your training and responding and reacting to what you need to do based on the threats as they pop up. And that's true,
Mhm.
honestly, when bang
Yeah.
is happening in our lives. Like I don't
Mhm,
need to be sometimes I can take a break and step back if true things are happening in front of me that are not physically unsafe. But sometimes just as a
mhm,
parent, I need to be able to react effectively and use those gut
mhm.
instincts. But sometimes they can lead me astray if I'm detecting something that
Yeah.
I'm emoting as physically unsafe when really it's just psychologically unsafe.
There's always gonna be things that we react to, and, when you talk about left to bang approach, we're just trying to minimize it, and one of the, in a business context, it's interesting, and I was talking to a founder, the conversation was, think about the things that have surprised, him in the past year, and the question was, like, if 25% of those things you were not surprised by, would that change things? And his answer was an immediate, like, "Yes." Just not being surprised oftentimes is enough, and he goes, we're still gonna have to react, there's always gonna be something that we miss in the environment. But if we're reacting to everything, we're never going to have the bandwidth to do that very well. And so, even just a portion of that time to free up his team's attention and effort to just be a little bit further ahead, a little more strategic, a little more thoughtful on what they're going to do about it, start to create this ripple effect of both calming the organization, but also then just creating these conditions where they can start to grow through incidents and disasters and crises and disruptions, as opposed to just react to them and hang on until the next thing pops up they need to put out the fire.
I love that term bandwidth. I actually first heard that at my current
Yeah.
duty station. I work with a lot of engineers and
Mhm.
scientists, and one in particular told me like he didn't have the bandwidth for a task that was coming across, and there were opportunities to clear up some of his bandwidth because a lot of it was encompassed with emotion and needless busyness and other things. But that's a different story for a different day. But bandwidth is important because if you are
Mhm.
concerned about and reacting to everything,
Yeah.
you can't focus on what matter. You can't
Mhm.
adequately prepare and or even respond to what's in your environment because it's just overwhelming. So the line between calm and panic can be based on your perception, but also your preparation. And yeah, these concepts again, it just as we talk more, I think about more and more environments that you can relate them to.
Mhm. And it's, the probably dated analogy, but there's a reason, originally, phone numbers, 7, 10 digits long, and 911 is 3 digits long. Under stress, under that situation, you can't recall full 7-digit phone number, but you can recall 3. And so just recognizing that under stress, your bandwidth is going to become even worse than it is on a normal day. And if little advanced warning. You can deal with it without the stress. Just again, options and opportunities to influence that outcome, and hopefully a positive, successful one. So whatever it is that you care about.
And we were talking about a little bit before, like all the knowledge in the world, fantastic. And you read this book, great. But if you don't start applying that knowledge to the domains that you're operating in, and now you have all these resources like your paid tier for the training, discussion videos, and all the things that happen through your journal. Um, Great way to start developing wisdom or application of these concepts in your life. The discussion guide was what I was trying to remember.
Mhm.
Absolutely. You can start having exercises to creatively think on your own to take these concepts and apply them to you. But what I like a lot is, again, the concepts, these easy words that relate exactly to what we need to focus on rather than new acronyms and new words to memorize. And no, this is just very intuitive for how can I apply this to my life? But we have to apply it. And that's what I've been trying to do now, like with anomalies or different terms that you use. But the application is so crucial. And that's what I love about the book is it gives you a template to do just that.
Well, you saw, if nothing else, Kyle, you saw my emotional reaction. I assumed you meant the PDF that's available. And people sometimes will thank you, like, glad you made this a PDF. I'm like, we didn't. That is a pirated copy of the book that you
Oh,
can
geez.
find online. So you probably just caught me just reacting, if nothing else, emotionally. So,
I did see that, but no, I did not know that, and no,
yeah,
hard copy books, it's the best,
oh,
and
yeah,
again,
oh,
this is I have
yeah,
I brought it from downstairs, but I have my bookcase upstairs, and that's
yeah,
in my favorites, but, yeah, that's crazy that a
yeah.
PDF has been pirated,
Oh,
that's
it is
nuts,
what it is. It's just
nuts.
natural, but
Yeah,
yeah,
and the good stuff gets copied, I guess, but, that's funny. I noticed
yeah.
some it's funny that you say that, but man, applying knowledge to your life to gain wisdom, so important, and I like that you mentioned earlier that one of the exercises that you do is you work with CEOs, companies, or people for post meditation, or of course, after you do some post meditation on things that have happened, because a lot of people come to you because they're saying not again. But now we can start thinking pre meditation of events that could potentially happen. But the post meditation, first and foremost, what's happening in your life? How did you respond? How could you prepare differently? What pre event indicators were there? Again, this concept can apply anywhere based on what your definition of bang is.
Helps people shift a little bit further left, each time they go through it. Again, just absolutely the goal, that we
Yeah.
had when we wrote the book,
I,
or, it's our work today.
Yeah, and what you continue to do in every domain. I love to say when you're awake, live consciously. And you want to be in the present and you want to be rationally in control of that. But ways to optimize your functionality in the present when you are safe and able to is reflect on the past to gain lessons from it. And then premeditating on the future, both where you want to go, but also how you're going to respond to adversity, which is inevitable. And we're not going to be able to predict what bang is and given
Mhm,
respect, but thinking about those potential circumstances and what you can do now to effectively prepare and train for them is
mhm.
my favorite thing in health, in relationships, professionally, anywhere. The premeditation is valuable. And I think that's one of the main things that you talk about and write about so well with your Substack account, what comes from this book.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to learn, we're putting, a lot of these things as we learn them, sometimes alongside clients or talking with different readers or students who've come through our courses. It's just cp-journal.com, and we're constantly putting up new articles and new resources and new thoughts or perspectives on this each week.
Last question I have for you. Is
Okay.
there another book that you're thinking about in the future as this evolves, or is it just more of the concept, applying it and come up with materials that supplement it?
There is, right, and we're starting to actively work on it. Probably ways away, still forming the goals and the perspective and kind of how we want to, tell the story that we have in mind. But there's absolutely a second book that we're starting to work through.
Love to hear it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Brother, this has been a pleasure. And
Yeah,
I could talk to you all day about like
yeah,
where to apply these concepts, how to apply them, the proactive training, which is one of my
mhm,
favorite things to think about, causing some stress on purpose so you can develop strategies to effectively respond to it. And the overlap with what I try to teach in the military now from a stress management and resilience perspective, I use terms like anomalies and baseline detection of changes based on what your general function is because of what I got from your book, which was not even intended to train concepts of
mhm,
resilience, but just
mhm.
the anomaly alone. It's just so
Yeah.
cool how it's evolved and can apply literally anywhere.
Yeah, and I appreciate the chance to have the conversation with you. I'm a big fan of your newsletter, Kyle, as well. It always gets me thinking, or thinking about things a little bit differently. So I appreciate all the effort that you're putting into that as well.
Thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure. I
Yeah.
look forward to talking again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, man. Have a good one.
See ya.